Hey, I'm so glad that you are back with us today. I want to start today with something that I hear from pastors pretty regularly. As most of you know, I work with pastors, actually, I guess all over the world, but primarily here in the US. And I get to travel and preach a lot and do a lot of consulting strategy, kind of intentional church work. And I hear common themes all the time. And one of the common themes that I hear over and over and over is that our Sunday vision moments just aren't moving people the way that I want. These inspirational moments don't seem to be inspiring people forward. I mean, they show some emotion, they engage, they're nodding their head, they'll clap and cheer for a story, but it doesn't seem to be just moving people in the direction that they hope. So, what these pastors typically do, and I get it, they try a few things, right? They look for better verbiage. They study maybe what larger churches are doing with their video stories. They try a different format. Sometimes, one of those things does help, a little, right? It's incremental, but it helps a little. But the Sunday moment still kind of falls or feels flat. And then, you as the pastor, you kind of walk off the stage wondering, what are we missing? Why isn't this working better? Here's what I would love to at least first say to you, if that's you as the pastor today. The problem is probably not exactly where you think it is. You're not dealing with a creativity problem or a talent problem, right? This is not well, if we just had a better video person, that's not the issue, right? What you're probably dealing with is more of a structural problem. And that distinction really does matter a lot because those problems have completely different solutions. Let me kind of unpack what I mean there. Every week, right, inside of your church, something happens that would probably stop a room on Sunday if they knew, right? Every Sunday, God is doing something every single Sunday. You don't know about it all the time, though, but He's up to something. A marriage that was maybe months away from ending starts, to find its footing again. That prodigal child comes back, and no one knows like why they chose this Sunday to do it, but they're back. Someone kind of hears something in a sermon or a conversation that just reorients how they see their life, and they don't even really fully understand it yet, but there's a reorienting that's happening. They can sense the direction is shifting, like those, and there's so many more, right? Those moments are real moments. They're movement moments, and they're happening constantly. And most of them are disappearing before anyone with access to the stage even knows that they occurred. I would love for you to sit with that for a second. I mean, think about it. Stories are happening every week, maybe by the ones, the tens, the dozens, the hundreds. You don't really know, but we know that they're happening. And the problem isn't that they're not happening. The problem is that those stories are going unheard because they're disappearing before anyone with access to share them even knows that they occurred. The material, if you think about it like material, vision, or, inspiration material, the material is there. It is there. Your church is generating ministry moments every single week. So the issue, I doubt, is frequency. I think the issue, and this is so true for almost every church, is capture. The issue is capture. It's structural, right? And if you don't kind of have a system for capturing, you're going to always be creating vision content from scratch. You're going to be trying to, beg and plead and find the one thing that you can share and creating or trying to create a story out of something that isn't really fully a story because you feel the need to have that inspiration. So you're trying to kind of create it from basically scratch, trying to make something kind of move that should be moving on its own. If you could just surface what God is already doing. So here's kind of where most churches go wrong. And I say this really with genuine apathy, empathy, because I get it. The instinct makes a lot of sense, right? When that vision kind of communication, that vision spot, right? For a lot of you, that happens after the worship set, before the sermon. But and I, by the way, think that's the best place for it. But wherever you place that little, we're going to inspire people to consider taking a step moment. Okay, when that moment feels weak, the communication feels kind of soft, Your instinct, and I get it, is to invest in communication, right? You bring in a better communications person, you upgrade the video team, you look for someone who can produce something more compelling, on Sunday mornings than you're currently able to do. You contract something, you hire something. And that investment isn't wasted, right? But it addresses, as we kind of said earlier, the wrong layer of this problem, right? I mean, a communication team knows how to present information. What most churches are missing is a story collection system that knows how to find the right information before, as I mentioned earlier, before it disappears. Like those are two completely different functions. And most churches have some version of the first and virtually nothing for the second. So if you're going to remember anything from this conversation, just kind of hold on to this, okay? You cannot tell the stories you are not structured to notice. It's kind of if we were to have a bottom line or sticky statement for this conversation, that's it. You cannot tell the stories that you are not structured to gather. You're not structured to notice. And really, that's it. That's the whole problem in one sentence. So what does that structural fix kind of look like? Because we want to be practical, right? I know some of you are thinking, right? Okay, Gavin, great diagnosis. Yeah, that's probably true in our church, but what do I actually do about it? Okay, well, it starts simpler than you might expect. I mean, think of this like a writer's room. Now, I have never been in a writer's room. I've watched shows about them and I've read about them. I have a general understanding. Maybe some of you have been in writer's rooms. You probably have a better understanding than me. Here's what we know. A good writer's room, like in a television, show, these people do not sit around waiting for inspiration, right? A good writer's room, they create a rhythm that surfaces material constantly, consistently, every single week, regardless of how the week really felt creatively, right? It's a discipline. And the discipline of this room is what produces that content, not the inspiration level on any given day of one of the writers. So you can build something kind of similar inside of your church. And you're not going to be making it up like a writer's room might, though. It doesn't require any new hires, doesn't require a new budget line. Amen to that. What it really starts with is a single question. And if you can ask this single question consistently in every staff meeting, in every one-on-one, in every kind of gathering with leaders or insiders, you're going to begin to change structurally the stories that you hear. Here's the question. You ready? What did you notice this week? That's it. I know. If you were expecting something more deep, sorry to disappoint, but that's the question. What did you notice this week? Now, I used to ask a similar question when I was the leader of Woodstock City Church. At our staff meetings and all that, I would say, what did you see this week that makes you feel like we're accomplishing our mission? And I do love that question. And I think it's great. I think tying the stories back to the mission and all that was a really helpful way to kind of contextualize the question. But here's what I also think could have happened in that question. What did you see this week that makes you feel like we're accomplishing our mission? That's like a big question that feels like it requires a big life change story, a big transformation story. I mean, accomplishing our mission, that's pretty weighty. Like to succeed in the mission in a story. I mean, that's a big story. But what about the question? What did you notice this week? That doesn't mean anything got fully accomplished. That doesn't mean there's any bows on this story. It just means that something shifted, something happened. And the people in your church, your staff, your core volunteer teams, your elders, your board members, your higher level people, they are seeing these things every week. They're having these conversations, right? So we don't want to ask, like, again, how did your ministry perform? You're right. We're not asking, what are the numbers showing? We're asking, what did you notice this week? That's a great question. And it leads to, some really great answers. Like people noticed maybe a meaningful conversation in the lobby, a genuine moment of movement where a person took a step for the first time, something someone said that just made a person stop in their tracks, right? And then when we hear those things, we learn systematically, right? We train ourselves to follow up with the second question. Do you think that that person, or if you're talking to them, hey, do you think you would be willing to share some of that story or allow us to share some of that? When you hear this question, or when you ask the question, what did you notice? The follow-up question, hey, how would you feel about sharing that with our church, or how would you feel about me maybe sharing that with our church? When you ask that question, here's what happens when you ask those two questions consistently. People, right, your staff, your core volunteer people, start collecting answers before the question's even asked because they know the question's coming. So before they even know, before the question is asked, they begin to shift their attention all week long, on Sundays, on Mondays, during one-on-one coffees, right? During the week, they're thinking about that question. And you're not adding a task, by the way, to their job. Really, what you're just doing is shifting their perspective to help them pay attention as they're having conversations, to help them kind of notice things that maybe were just going unnoticed because it's not a part of their normal job description. Of course, that two questions alone, just by themselves, they're not quite enough to shift everything, right? I mean, in a writer's room without a showrunner, right, produces noise, not really great stories. So someone in your church has to take what is surfacing from these questions, whether they're in meetings or one-on-ones or whatever, but someone has to be the showrunner. Someone has to take these answers that are surfacing and actually do something with it. Right? Someone needs to follow up with the person whose story came up, or decide whether it's a usable story for a Sunday or a social post, right? Or an email. Someone has to be the person who moves it through the process so that it can land on the platform at the right time with the right words behind it. So, this doesn't really create a new staff position or anything, but it does require taking someone maybe who already has proximity to your leadership and to your stage and giving them this kind of responsibility. And really, you just say, I want you to be in charge of moving the best stories from the lobby to the stage. That's part of your job description. You are in charge of moving the story from the person to the platform. I shared a document where, yeah, or maybe, sorry, I didn't share it. I've created one before, but maybe you just like create a shared document. Maybe it's just a Google sheet or a Google Doc, right? It's something very basic that you can kind of create where everybody can dump stories into, where you can log different stories. And it could be like during your, weekly check-ins, people fill that out a little bit, or, a standing item on, the agenda for staff meeting, just to go into the doc and fill in some stuff. I mean, really, that's kind of infrastructure to support the new structure that we're trying to create, the new perspective, right? And again, I know what I love about this is that it's not complicated, but man, it is so much more intentional. Systems really do not just run themselves, right? We need to run the system. And this is a great system, but we need to run it. We need to own it. And noticing something doesn't emerge onto the platform unless we are actively working the system, the playbook. So here's the move I'd love to encourage you to maybe take this week. So before your next staff meeting, I would love for you to add one question. I'll give you one guess what it is to your staff meeting agenda. Okay, just the one question. What did you notice this week? And then give people a few minutes, like allow them to write down maybe what surfaced, what they saw, what they heard. And then at the end of that, few minutes, or maybe even wait till the end of the meeting, share all those stories and try to flag one, two, three, four of them to follow up on. And I'm glad it's not more complicated. That's it. That's the leadership move that you can make that will begin to shift the entire storytelling system. Now, of course, if you do this consistently over the next few weeks, something is going to shift. You ask the question once, people aren't always going to be ready for the question. They're not going to really know how to answer the question the very first time you ask it. Ask it 2 and 3 and 4 times. It begins to become cultural, habitual in your organization. So, and the culture is going to shift because of that. And it's not going to be because your team, I love this, got more talented or you hired better people. You've got great people. You don't have to increase your budget for this. All you started doing is kind of feeding the platform with real stories, real material that was already inside your church. Here's the reality for most churches, right? If no system exists, the best stories just keep disappearing. I don't want that for you. You don't want that. And you know what? I want your church to hear the stories that are happening that they are a part of creating. So the moment in the lobby, that breakthrough in small group, like the text that your student pastor got on a Tuesday afternoon, those are so powerful. and they can be shared, and God can use them to move people. But if you don't have a structure in place for it, those stories just disappear. And then your congregation, they just keep hearing the same kind of generic vision, the polished language, right, about what the church is doing, but you don't really have the evidence to back it up or give it credibility. And you know what happens if that's the story? Over time, people begin to see the gap between what you're saying and what the church is actually doing. And they versus what they see actually happening, right? They begin to see that gap between what you say is happening, but you're not sharing all that. And it isn't because it isn't happening, it's just because you don't have a system to share it. And the problem with a gap like that is that it's not a neutral gap. It starts to erode trust. And if we erode trust, we begin to erode momentum, and then it creates this slow drift and it's hard to diagnose that drift because it isn't happening all at once. So here's the bottom line. Here's a reminder. The stories are there. They're already there. The only question is whether you are structured to find them. So build a system that can help you surface the stories. Start it this week. Ask one question. What did you notice this week? Get one story, follow up on it, and then go from there. Hey, thanks for joining us. We'll see you for the next one.